Here are the most feared inmates in the world. Number 10. Jason Barnum. One of the most famous prisoner faces in the world, Barnum was 30 years old when he was sentenced to 22 years for the shooting and murder of an Alaskan police officer. He's addicted to illicit substances and clearly wanted to advertise his danger and intimidate those he interacts with. Getting such a complete face tattoo, including the eye tattoo, is a serious level of commitment to a very certain type of aesthetic. Barnum pled guilty to first-degree attempted murder, first-degree burglary, and third-degree felony possession of a weapon. Barnum holds a notorious reputation in the prison he has been incarcerated in for his violent nature and unsociable behavior. Since his incarceration, Barnum has been the subject of numerous assaults, both giving and receiving. In a moment of clarity, he showed remorse for his actions in the courtroom and contested that he had practically been abandoned by the state following his previous arrest. Without any support and his tattoos, he had no way of being lawfully employed and was forced to return to a life of crime in order to subsist. The courts didn't see it that way. He will be eligible for parole in his 50s, and it is hoped that his time in prison will have blunted his violent tendencies enough for him to return to public life. Number 9. Lorenzo Pollard. Pollard was initially arrested on charges of theft, trespassing, property damage, and resisting arrest. His length of sentence is unknown, but likely under 15 years. However, Pollard was dissatisfied and wanted to attempt to break free of the correctional facility. What Pollard lacked in planning ability, he made up for in sheer guts and fighting skill. Making a makeshift pair of nunchucks out of a bedsheet and chair legs, Pollard then hid them on his person and waited for his opportunity. While he was being led by guards down to the shower area, Pollard rapidly withdrew his nunchucks and started to fight. For over half an hour, Lorenzo led correctional officers in a rolling fist fight that traversed up the prison and out into the correctional yard. Pollard faced down dozens of officers but managed to make it outside the prison before escaping. Pollard lasted a full hour outside the prison walls before a massive manhunt came together to bring him back into custody. It's likely that he's facing dozens of counts of assault and battery of an officer, and has probably lost access to any materials he could make another set of nunchucks from. Number 8. Maninder Singh Pandher. Maninder Pandher is an Indian mass murderer and human eater who had possibly up to 18 victims during his time outside of bars. Maninder is a wealthy and politically powerful Punjabi businessman who was first arrested under suspicion of connection to the murder of a young girl from Delhi. Widespread criticism was drawn from the parents of the victims, who felt the investigation was hindered by the corruption of the police and their involvement with Pandher's business and political connections. However, after several years of investigation, Maninder and his servant, Surinder, were convicted of the kidnapping, violation, and murder of a dozen women. Maninder was first put on death row, but his sentence was commuted to a life sentence in 2009. Maninder has spent much of his time in prison in solitary confinement due to his violent and unpredictable nature. Other inmates describe Maninder as deeply disturbed and a seriously unsettling presence in the prison. Recent disappearances in the prison have been rumored to have some connection to Maninder, and prisoners continue to live in fear of him. Number 7. Thomas Silverstein. Silverstein's young life was a constant series of violent lessons in which he learned to solve his problems and defend himself using violence. He was bullied heavily, and his mother instructed him to fight back or she would give him worse. When his fighting ended him up in juvenile detention, he soon learned that violence was necessary there as well. By the time Silverstein was 19, he was sent to San Quentin for armed robbery. He would be paroled again before being again arrested for armed robbery. While at his next prison, Silverstein became affiliated with a notorious white supremacist prison gang, the Aryan Brotherhood. Membership within the Brotherhood is contingent on proving your loyalty through violent demonstrations of strength. Once embroiled with the gang, Silverstein committed another 3 murders of other inmates, some in spectacularly violent fashion. This earned Silverstein multiple life sentences. Silverstein later lured corrections officer Merle Klutz to walk ahead of him before attacking Klutz with an improvised weapon. Klutz would die from his wounds, and Silverstein spent the next 36 years in nearly continuous solitary confinement. Most guards refused to speak to Silverstein at any point due to his high danger and out of respect for the fallen officer Klutz. Number 6. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo. Nicknamed the Butcher of Rostov, Chikatilo was charged with the murder and violation of over 50 women over the course of 12 years in the Russian, Ukrainian, and Uzbek Soviet Socialist republics. A child during the German occupation of Ukraine, Chikatilo grew up around some of the worst horrors humanity has ever perpetrated on one another, and was left deeply scarred and unstable. Chikatilo was conscripted into the Red Army and served in a KGB communications unit in East Berlin. However, starting September 1978, Chikatilo would begin kidnapping and murdering women at a prodigious rate. Andrei would eventually be captured after a lengthy and delayed process, but not before he had ended the lives of over 50 people. He was sentenced to death, but during the weeks he spent on death row, other inmates reported being deeply disturbed and feared for their lives. It was well known Chikatilo was too cowardly to ever attack someone face to face, but that didn't stop the inmates from fearing a quiet knife in the dark or a garrote while they slept. When Chikatilo was finally put to death, the whole of the USSR breathed a sigh of relief. Number 5. Robert Stroud. Better known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, Robert Stroud was a troubled and damaged man. At the age of 13, he ran away from home, and by 18, he was a brothel keeper. In January of 1909, one of Stroud's mistresses was attacked by a bartender. In retaliation, Stroud attacked the man and ended his life with a brutal series of shots. For this crime, he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Stroud rapidly gained a reputation for violence and had frequent confrontations with guards and inmates. In 1916, he stabbed a guard and ended their life. He was initially sentenced to death for this crime, but after several trials, was simply sentenced to life in prison. Stroud may have been a violent murderer, but he did have one soft spot. During his incarceration at Leavenworth, he came upon a bird with a broken wing. He nursed the bird back to health and was soon fascinated with birds. He made a hobby of caring for injured birds and even training and breeding them. In time, he had over 300 canaries and equipment that the prison warden allowed him to use to research the birds. He published a book in 1933 called Diseases of Canaries, and a later edition in 1943. He even found a cure for the hemorrhagic septicemia family of diseases, which earned him renown and respect from ornithologists. Despite his murderous and violent nature, he found peace and purpose in the studying of birds. Number 4. Brendan Cummins. Brendan Cummins was a youth boxing champion before falling into a life of criminal violence. He's served time in the past for knife attacks and slashings, but will now be in prison for life. Following a more recent arrest for attacking Gardaí officers with a katana, Brendan is one of the most violent and incorrigible offenders in Irish prison. While in prison, he routinely fought with guards, including once asking for a guard to give him a roll of toilet paper before splashing boiling water on the officer's face when he returned. Brendan then spent almost 4 years in solitary confinement, which his therapist and lawyers say has done nothing to improve his behavior. Instead, the isolation has made Cummins even more unstable and more violent. He says he used to be violent to prove himself or to assert his dominance, but now he uses violence as an outlet for his boredom. Brendan has been in several altercations with other inmates and is described as a destabilizing force inside the prison. Guards hardly interact with him anymore to protect themselves, which has turned most of his ire to the other prisoners. Cummins is unlikely to ever be reformed to the point that he can reintegrate with society, and will likely be terrorizing inmates and guards alike until the end of his days. Number 3. Robert Maudsley. Also known as Hannibal or the Brain Eater, Maudsley would be the longest serving British prisoner in isolation. Maudsley had a deeply troubled early life. One of 12 children, Maudsley spent his first 8 years in an orphanage before his parents reclaimed him at the age of 8. His father routinely physically abused him until social services eventually had to remove him from their care. He was left with deep psychological scars, and by the late 60s he was selling his body to pay for his substance addiction. In 1974, Maudsley was picked up by a client who showed him illicit and disturbing photos. With his own childhood trauma, Maudsley snapped and garroted the man inside the car. Maudsley was found unfit to stand trial and was sent to Broadmoor Hospital, hopefully to help his numerous psychological issues. Maudsley would take the lives of 3 more people during his time incarcerated, specifically targeting molesters and abusers. So, while he may not have been feared by the general incarcerated population, he was deeply feared by any deviant or sexual criminals. Number 2. Barry Mills. Nicknamed the Baron, Barry Mills was the leader of the notoriously violent white nationalist prison gang, the Aryan Brotherhood. Barry was arrested for armed robbery at a young age and was quickly indoctrinated into the AB chapter at San Quentin. In the 1980s, he had risen through the ranks and was part of a restructuring effort which saw the consolidation of gang power and the absorption of several other white nationalist prison gangs around different prisons in the country. He helped to expand the gang's markets into racketeering and narcotics smuggling, and in 1997, Mills and another high-level member ordered a race war against a rival black prison gang. Until his passing at 70 in 2018, Mills was the most feared inmate in American prisons, and had the power to order a person's death in nearly any prison in the country. It's believed he was responsible for the murders of 50 or more people. The current leaders of AB are unknown, but undoubtedly have a similar level of power as he had. Number 1. John Mongrel. John Mongrel was a South African gang leader and member of the infamous Numbers prison gang. The Numbers gang are so called because of their use of numbers to code what role an individual had in the gang. The 26s are in charge of collecting and distributing the money of the gang, coordinating logistics and ensuring that everything runs smoothly. The 27s are in charge of coordinating the 26s and 28s and act as liaisons between the two groups. But the 28s are the most famous and dangerous. The 28s are the soldiers of the Numbers gang and are chosen for their ferocity, violence, and bloodlust. John Mongrel was the leader of the 28s for many years following the 80s 28s war. Unlike other prisoners where 26s or even 27s held the power and decision-making controls of the gang, in Mongrel's prison, Pollsmoor, he made sure that all the best food, kit, and care went to the 28s. With essentially a private army under his command, Mongrel ordered the executions of tens of hundreds of inmates and carried out more than a few himself. Following an interview with Ross Kemp, many 28s felt that Mongrel was getting too famous for his own good. It's not clear that his own gang members took his life, as there is no information around his cause of death whatsoever, but I think it to be a bit too much of a coincidence that he was found dead after receiving such criticism from 28s who would usually die before speaking badly of their general. Those are our most feared inmates in the world. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share, and make sure to follow for more.